I felt the punch before I saw it coming, a hard hook that snapped my head and filled my mouth with that hot copper taste you never forget. And as one drop of blood fell onto my white silk shirt, I heard myself ask a question I didn't expect to ask out loud. Is this the price of telling the truth, or the beginning of it? The sidewalk went quiet like somebody turned the city down to a low hum. Have you ever had a moment where your instinct screamed swing back, but something deeper said, wait? It was just before 9 sun throwing long lines across the steps of the 15th precinct, that old brick fortress with thick glass and thicker habits, the kind of building that looks like it learned how to scowl. I came early on purpose, jacket folded over my arm tie, still in my pocket shirt, so clean it made the grime on the wall look embarrassed. People will tell you clothes don't matter, but sometimes what you wear is a mirror, and I wanted the morning to see itself. So I stood still and let the place breathe around me. No entourage, no announcement, just me, the street, and a plan I had carried longer than I care to admit. I wasn't lost. I wasn't waiting for a client. I was listening, to posture, to footsteps, to that little rise in volume when men who think they own a block step outside to take a victory lap. 3 of them pushed through the glass doors like they were coming out of a locker room after a win, coffee in hand, badges glinting, the kind of laughter that sounds like it learned to punch before it learned to talk. Dave Miller in front, big across the chest, jaw tight, 15 years of turning authority into gravity. Kevin Russo a half step behind with his phone already half raised like trouble was content, and he was the content creator. Ben Carter on the edge of their orbit, younger posture, saying academy, more than street eyes that hadn't learned how to lie the way his mouth was about to. You know the type, right? Lead bully hype man and the kid trying to pass a test that the wrong men wrote. Look at this peacock, Miller said, not bothering to lower his voice, and I could smell the coffee and the contempt at the same time, both stale in different ways. You got a problem. He stepped into my space because that's where men like him feel tall, chest out, chin, high shoulders, squared the performance as old as power. I let the silence sit, not because I was scared, but because silence is a tool if you don't waste it. The trick is to make it clean. He took my quiet like an insult you could touch. He shoved me once, open palm to the sternum, that cop move meant to steal your balance and your dignity in one motion. My feet didn't move. He shoved harder, hips involved this time, still nothing. That offended him more than any words could have, so he did what men do when their script falls apart. He swung. The hook was practiced all shoulder and habit, and it caught me clean, a flash of white behind my eyes, a little bell ringing in a far room. I took one step back because physics is honest, brought my fingers up, saw the blood bright on my skin, and watched a single drop fall onto my shirt like a red period you could not ignore. And then something happened. I wish I could teach. The first silence became a different silence, not the kind that waits, the kind that judges. Phones lifted. A dog walker across the street stopped and steadied her hands. A construction worker on the scaffolding leaned over his railing the way men do when story beats weather to the punch. Inside the tinted glass, the desk sergeant Frank O'Connell looked up from 30 years of paperwork, and his eyes told me he knew every scene that begins like this, and how too many of them end. Resisting Miller barked a little too loud, as if saying it would make it true. Russo gave that practiced ooh like he was on a couch watching a highlight reel instead of standing 10 feet from a felony. Carter's jaw clenched until it shook. Sweat ran shiny on Miller's temple, and I could see the thought forming. He needed a justification worse than he needed the truth. On the ground, he said, already reaching for the cuffs, because choreography feels like control when your story has holes. On what charge, I asked, keeping my voice flat, not challenging, just not giving him the script he wanted. Assaulting an officer, he said, and even the sidewalk rolled its eyes. Here's where I talk to you like we're sitting at a kitchen table, because this is where the questions always come. Why didn't you say who you were? Why not stop it before it drew blood? Why stand there and let a man like that dig his own hole? I hear you. If it were you, what would you have done? You tell me in the comments, because I meant it when I say I want to hear your answer. But my answer is simple. A system doesn't change if you protect it from seeing itself. Culture hides in the dark. If I had flashed a title, if I had called in a parade, the masks would have come up. The performance would have changed, and nothing underneath would have moved. I wasn't baiting a man. I was revealing a habit. There's a difference. Miller slammed me into the brick, the wall rough enough to say hello through the shirt. Russo did the pockets while narrating like a toddler with a toy microphone. Wallet license with an address that made him slow down like the letters were a test he didn't study for platinum card that put a curl on his lip. Then Miller's fingers found the leather badge case in my jacket and he smiled like a man who thought he'd just discovered gravity. He snapped it open and held it up to the crowd like a prize he won at a county fair. Impersonating an officer, he said, "And if a sentence could confess on itself, that one did." The badge was real. The ID next to it said more than he wanted to read, but hatred narrows your eyesight until truth an inch from your face looks like fog. Across the glass, O'Connell stood up. He couldn't hear us, but he could hear posture, and it was screaming at him through the door. Out on the steps, the air shifted, the way it does when a storm is down the block. Inside my head, the checklist I'd written in another city years earlier started flipping its pages without my help. Location, public sidewalk. Camera angles, lobby lens, east corner phones across the street. Violations cataloged, unlawful stop assault, illegal search, witnesses indexed. I didn't say those words. I held them like tools in a belt. You know what I mean. On the ground, Miller repeated, angrier at my calm than at anything else in the picture. "We're done here." He wasn't done. The city was just starting. That's what you think he said when I didn't move, and you could hear the crack in his voice where certainty used to live. He doesn't know I thought not yet, and a strange sadness ran through me for half a second. Sadness for a man who let the worst part of himself write his whole story. It passed. Some lessons love mercy. Some only understand consequence. The glass doors opened. Captain Ava Rostova stepped onto the top stair like someone who knows exactly what time it is. If you've ever watched a room straighten itself because a woman with standards walked in, you know the feeling. It's not fear, it's relief. With good posture, she took one clean look, me against the wall cuffs, out a badge dangling where it shouldn't. Carter Pale Russo halfway through recording his own ruin, a crowd collecting proof because they've learned to. Her face did the math. It was 8:58. She knew who she was supposed to be shaking hands with at 9. Dread moved through her eyes like a shadow. Then discipline snapped everything back into place. "Officer Miller," she said, a quiet edge that cuts deeper than shouting report. He tried a sentence built out of old habits and bad faith and watched it die on his tongue as he spoke it. She turned to me. If there's a thing called professional instinct, she had it in her bones. I met her eyes and I made a choice not to humiliate, not to gloat, not to go theatrical, just to tell the truth in a tone that would hold. "Captain," I said, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you," though the welcoming committee was a little more hands-on than I expected. I eased off the wall under my own power hands, open, no panic, no bravado, just a man returning to the center of himself. "I'm Marcus Thorne," I said. I let Miller flinch before the rest of it landed. "Your new chief of police." Everything stopped. Not the city never stops, but the part of the morning that pretended it had control. Russo's mouth fell open. Carter whispered something only he and God needed to hear. O'Connell in the window shut his eyes like a man who could see headlines. The woman with the dog lowered her phone just a little. The construction worker said, "Damn," in 2 syllables. Miller stared at his own hand like it had betrayed him. For once, the silence belonged to the truth. This is where a lot of people expect me to perform. Throw the title like a brick. Turn the stairs into a stage. That would feel good for a minute, and then it would make everything smaller. I did something better. I worked. "Captain," I said, pivoting to her because chain of command is a promise, not a prop. "Secure this scene. 10-block perimeter. Anyone with a phone is now a material witness. Sergeant O'Connell, step outside, please. Call Internal Affairs Code 1 state-level oversight. We are not investigating ourselves in a mirror today. People moved because tone is gravity when it carries the weight of responsibility." She snapped into it like a memory she was glad to have. O'Connell came through the door, already dialing. "Officers," I said, and I made the word heavy because it needed the weight hands on the wall fingers interlaced behind your heads. Miller didn't move for a breath. Pride dies slower than reputation. "Now," I said, and whatever was holding his spine up gave way. "Captain, disarm them. Primary weapons backups. Knives, anything sharp enough to cut truth. Evidence bags. You'll cuff them yourself." The cuffs clicked. The wall felt their palms. The phones kept recording. And if you want to call that a spectacle, fine, but understand the point. It wasn't humiliation, it was a reset in public so the story couldn't be rewritten in a conference room later. Do you think that was fair, or do you think I should have done it quietly? Be honest. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. By noon, the air above the block sounded like a swarm of helicopters had opinions. Clips from 6 angles were already on feeds that know your face better than you do. Hashtags did what hashtags do, some brave, some bitter, some both. I changed my shirt, not because I was hiding, but because interviews go better when you don't look like an open wound, and I left the bandage on my lip for the same reason. We weren't pretending. The mayor stood to my left, playing that game where you try to look serious and not terrified at the same time. The district attorney took my right with a jaw set to "I'm listening." I didn't give a speech. I told people what they were already watching. This wasn't an isolated punch. It was a symptom. Symptoms point to sickness. We weren't just putting ice on a bruise, we were doing surgery. Every complaint file reopened. Every use of force report reread by humans, not machines. Duty to intervene moved from a poster to a policy with teeth. Training rebuilt with de-escalation at the center, not in a slide at the end of a long day. You do the job, you keep the job. You use the badge like a weapon against the public you promise to protect. The job stops being yours. Simple doesn't mean easy, but it means true. Yeah, that happened. Inside the building, IA worked like clockmakers, precise hands and no patience for shortcuts. Computers were logged, bagged, carried out like slow truths with handles. Group chats got subpoenaed. Body cams told stories they had never been asked to tell. The union said predictable words on the steps a week later about witch hunts and morale and the thin blue line, and I didn't argue with the microphones because paper beats noise if you write it carefully enough. You win a day with a press conference. You win a future with documentation. Now let me say this clearly because I don't do coy. I didn't plan to get punched. I didn't bait a man into a crime. I showed up without a parade to watch a culture act the way it acts when it thinks no one important is watching. If that offends you, ask yourself why. If that comforts you, ask yourself what you're going to do with that comfort. If it were you starting a job that required cutting out rot without killing the patient, would you open the body in the dark or in daylight? Here's the twist behind the twist. People think the reveal was the surprise. Chief on the steps. Sure, that played well on TV. But the real twist was older and quieter. I had spent years in internal affairs writing checklists and protocols meant to keep moments like this from needing a camera to matter. I knew which lobby lens had the angle. I knew which sergeant would see body language before he heard words. I knew that a bully who lives off an audience can't resist one. I didn't need a title to prove any of that. I needed patience, a clean shirt, and the willingness to let a culture show its own reflection. The days that followed weren't a montage. They were long, sober, repetitive, necessary. Citizens who had filed complaints that drifted into drawers found themselves sitting across from investigators who took notes like they meant it. Young officers realized in whispered hallway conversations that there were more good ones than they'd been told, and the relief in that discovery felt like taking off a heavy coat in July. Rostova grew taller without changing height. O'Connell, who had been counting days to retirement with a cynical pencil, started bringing ideas to morning briefings like he remembered why he signed up. We moved desks, changed routes, swapped who answered the public phone at night. Little things that turn into big things when you repeat them enough. Ben Carter asked to meet. I won't theatricize a private conversation, but I'll give you the outline because it belongs in the story. He told the truth under oath. About the shove, about the punch, about the moment his spine froze because loyalty and fear outvoted training. He didn't paint himself as a hero rescued by conscience. He said he failed to act. He owned it. The court heard that. So did I. Redemption is not the opposite of accountability. Sometimes it's what accountability makes possible. Do you think a 23-year-old should lose his name for a choice he can spend a life correcting? Or do you think a lifetime ban is the only message a system can hear? I'm asking you honestly. Argue with me. The trial came fast for the times we live in because evidence didn't stutter. The videos did the heavy lifting, but witnesses carried weight you could feel. The woman with the dog hands trembling but voice clear. The construction worker who said he knew what he saw because a man's hands tell the truth even when his mouth doesn't. O'Connell's testimony about posture and pattern, not personal vendetta, the kind of steady that juries respect. Defense tried clouds. Truth punched through. The verdicts tracked the facts. Miller, 10 years federal. Russo, 5 because coming clean after your hand finds metal is different from doing it before. Carter, probation lifetime ban from law enforcement, a chance to be better somewhere else. The city cut checks that stung, and good budgets should bleed when citizens do under color of law or nothing changes next time. Inside the department, the consequences kept moving. 7 fired, 2 demoted, 1 retired without a party. We put duty to intervene into a policy that didn't whisper, it shouted, and then we taught it like the oxygen in the room. We took de-escalation out of a binder and built it into scenarios until muscle memory learned a new song. We created a mentorship program that paired hard years with new eyes, and I put O'Connell in charge because I trust a man who can read a room without a soundtrack. We promoted Rostova because her instincts have edges that cut the right things, and we didn't need to make a parade of it. We let the work announce itself. The neighborhood didn't flip overnight. It leaned, it tested, it believed a little longer each month. People started waving with their whole hand. Complaints still came because humans are humans and power needs oversight every single day, but the tone changed, not the volume, the tone. Folks stopped starting every conversation with a flinch. Block captains called before trouble instead of after. Beat cops stayed long enough on a corner to learn names instead of descriptions. It sounds small if you've never been on a street that doesn't trust you. It's not small. It's everything. I kept that white shirt. I hung it behind my office door where I can see it when I forget who I am. The tiny red bloom looks smaller than it felt, but that's how symbolic things work. They shrink to fit the hanger and grow to fill your head. It reminds me that winning isn't a word you get to use about a day like that. It reminds me that leadership is sometimes the decision to stand still while a fist finds you, and then use the consequences to build something that might outlast you. It reminds me that a sidewalk is a courtroom, and a camera can be a gavel when the system refuses to hold itself to its own rules. Let me be fair to a tough truth. Not everyone inside that building wanted this. Some hated me personally, some hated the process, some hated the idea that accountability could include their name if the facts did. A few left, a few stayed and learned different habits because they decided the job mattered more than the tradition of looking away. A few tested the edges and learned the hard way that the edges bite back now. That's reform. It is not clean. It is not soft. It is not a press release. It is 1,000 quiet refusals to let the wrong thing slide. There were nights I stood with my hands on the glass of that office window and looked out at a grid of lights that don't know who you are and don't need to, and I liked it that way. I don't want to be famous. I want the next rookie to put a hand on a partner's wrist before it turns into a fist. I want the next citizen to feel like a complaint form is a promise, not a suggestion. I want the next captain to step onto a stair and feel the city lean toward her because trust came back to the block. That's it. That's the list. You're probably wondering about the men who started this. I think about them more than you'd expect. Not in a revenge way, in a human way. Miller sits in a federal facility with time to count regrets. Russo learned that a laugh track won't follow you into a courtroom. Carter teaches at a youth boxing gym now footwork and patience, how to keep your hands where they belong and your eyes where they need to be. He didn't ask me to absolve him. He didn't ask the internet either. He just shows up for kids who haven't learned the wrong lessons yet. Is that soft in your book, or is that what real accountability tries to build when the cameras go home? Tell me. I'm listening. Departments from other cities call sometimes looking for a template they can laminate and hang on a wall. I tell them there isn't one, not a clean one, not a safe one. You can't do this without letting your public see what you wish they wouldn't. You can't do this without officers willing to love their oath more than their friendships on a bad day. You can't do this without leaders who will stand very still and choose process over pride while the worst part of a system takes a cheap shot. You can't do this without witnesses who refuse to be quiet because they've learned that quiet is where bad stories regenerate. That's the kit. It's not for sale, it's work. And I'm not going to lie to you, I replay that morning sometimes. The red bloom, the quiet, the moment where saying my name could have ended it earlier. I don't relive it to punish myself. I revisit it to keep the edge sharp, to keep the choice fresh, to remember that the right thing rarely comes wrapped in applause. If it were you standing where I stood, would you have held your tongue until the truth had nowhere to hide, or would you have flashed the badge and gone inside to start the meeting on time? There isn't one right answer for every day. There was one for that day, and I chose it. I own the consequences. So here we are at the end of the story, or the end of this chapter, because justice is a long book, and most of us won't live to the last page. Let me ask you what I asked myself half a dozen times while I was writing this down for you. What is the most powerful form of justice? Is it punishment that says a bad act gets a heavy price? Or is it reform that says the next act will be better because we refuse to pretend the last one never happened? Maybe the answer is rhythm. Punishment where it's due, reform where it can breathe truth first, mercy, honest consequences certain. Maybe you think I got that wrong. Good. Say why. If you've watched all the way to this moment, thank you. Stories like this aren't about the person telling them. They're about the people brave enough to talk back to them, to push, to disagree, to add their own scar stories to the pile so the rest of us can learn. Drop your thoughts below. Tell me if I waited too long, if I should have moved sooner, if you think sunlight makes the surgery better or just bloodier. If it were you, what would you have done and what would you change in yourself first? Share this with someone who sees this from the opposite side and ask them to meet you here in the comments. Hit subscribe if you want to keep having hard conversations in public. Hit the bell so we don't have to rely on algorithms to find each other, and tell me your own sidewalk courtroom story. I'm reading them, I'm learning, and I'm not done.